All right.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Pax Americana. We're so sorry that we missed you last week. I was traveling, which is why we were not here for this on Thursday, although hopefully many of you joined us this Tuesday and the Tuesday before, or the Monday before, for our new series, um, which describes Russia's interference in the 2016 election. If you have not yet joined us for that, please do that every Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. But we are still back here with you every Thursday at 11 a.m. for Pax Americana to talk about things going on right now, not historically with respect to the previous election. Olga, there's a lot going on. Happy Tariff Day.
I know. Happy tariff. Oh, and this liberation part two. Is
I
this what's
guess.
happening?
I guess for some, right? Interestingly, liberation for China, for India, which Trump has thrown really heavy tariffs on for, strangely, selling oil to Russia. But he has not done that to China and to other countries. What do you make of all that?
I think it's something personal that he's trying to put pressure on India specifically. China, we keep seeing him kind of, give them a way out. And even though he took a few harsher steps, he immediately rolled it back. So I wouldn't put too much into it. But being this has nothing to do with our episode, but being we're on economic news, a very Russian-esque thing happened today because Trump apparently is not happy with the CEO of Intel.
Yep.
And it's pressuring him to resign. And this is where we are 7 months in. We are now the president of the United States is demanding who a private company chooses. At least these people aren't falling out of windows yet, so this is a good thing. But I mean, this is really, another line we're crossing into because I mean, this is the whole point of America that the private sector can operate privately without any demands from the U.S. government.
Yeah, what I find interesting about the Intel thing, you said it is very Russia-esque, is the Republican Party, my entire life and yours as well, has been the party of small government. They
Hmm.
absolutely capitalism. They do not want any involvement in private industry. They want to, you know, kind of Adam Smith the whole situation and have everything be complete separation of government, small government, big business. And yet here you have one of the largest chip manufacturers in the country being told that they have to get rid of their CEO. And of course, what happened today is that Intel stock just plummeted. At the same time that he's putting huge tariffs on chips, he said 100% tariffs on chips, but with massive exclusions. So again, I mean, let's understand this has nothing to do with the president or the CEO of Intel and whatever else he may be doing. The sensible reason for this is that he's got some private business going on in China. So does the Trump family. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Ivanka was getting patents from China. So this is obviously something to do with Intel not kissing the ring enough or not buying enough Trump meme coin crypto, not giving him a gold-plated gift the way that Tim Cook of Apple did yesterday, which was just like a tribute almost that he paid showing up at the White House. And of course, immediately Trump said no tariffs on Apple products made overseas. So it is so very Russian. And it
Hmm.
is so very, more importantly, un-American that it's almost breathtaking because if roles were reversed and this were a Democratic president doing this, the party of small government would just be going ballistic. Um, if we want to talk about other outrages along these lines, you had breaking news today that the Trump administration is planning to cut $64 million to the New York City security funding.
Yep.
Um, within a week after a horrible shooting in New York, which everybody immediately upon that happening, I know in the back of my mind and in the back of everybody's mind who's lived in New York was thinking, oh my God, another terrorist attack. It wasn't not the kind of terrorist attack that we all fear in New York, but nevertheless, it was a terrorist attack. I mean, somebody drove here to terrorize the NFL and shot people as a result and killed them. Um, you have the Department of Justice, there's a Department of Justice official on video urging January 6th rioters to kill cops. And that person is now working in the Justice Department. I mean, all of this, if the roles were reversed and this were Democrats doing this, I can only imagine that Fox News would be running wall-to-wall coverage interviews on 6th Avenue with New Yorkers saying, how unsafe do you feel because President, pick your Democratic name, President Harris, is gutting funding for your security after 9/11, and footage of the towers falling and footage of this guy from Vegas last week showing up. And so to me, this is so fascinating
Mhm.
because there's no core value anymore.
No. And
It's just
if you want
amazing.
to speak uh, more Russia related news, the State Department issued guidance that now the U.S. government should not criticize El Salvador, Russia, or Israel for any human rights violations, crimes, and the egregious actions they carry out. So, I mean, we're really, we see where this regime is aligning with. It's, going down the path of Russia. The Intel news today, I mean, literally, we're, a minute away from Trump actually beginning to nationalize companies because his buddy Putin is running around for the past year since a full-scale invasion and pressure on the economy. Since over the past year, he's like nationalized upwards of 600 companies, if not more, on top of, people being jailed from the companies, others mysteriously dying. So, I mean, we're really walking into dark territory. My concern is I just don't understand where this outrage is, because I remember when things like this were happening in Russia, there was so much outrage from like everyone. And here we're literally walking in the same Russian style system. And it's like, not as much. Maybe because it's so overwhelming, I don't know. And then with the Intel news, we can't avoid the corruption, aspect of it, because I guarantee you before Trump made that tweet and moved Intel's price, well, I'm sure that people were aware and made market moves knowing that Intel was about to stock dive. The stocks were about to dive after he made that post.
Well, and in the back of all this and why this is so dangerous is this Trump crypto meme coin, but also World Financial Lenders, which is his majority of which is owned by the Trump family crypto exchange, basically, that is being run by Steve Witkoff, and we'll get to him in a moment. Steve Witkoff's son. We don't know if Intel's competitors are buying crypto or investing in this fund to benefit the Trump family financially, and that's why he went after Intel. We don't know if Intel did not buy some number of crypto coins or shares of World Financial Lenders in order to avoid this kind of fate. And I don't know if they did or they didn't, but the very fact that you have a incredibly large, worth billions of dollars investment, private investment, that is secret, that people can funnel money into, is just incredible. And there's another story today, which is so reminiscent again of sort of Russian corruption, except Putin's actually a lot less overt about it than Trump is,
Yeah.
um, where somebody was being audited by some department in some federal agency, and that person went to Trump's dinner that he had, the crypto dinner, and donated a large sum of money. And the next day, Trump put out a statement, and he handed Trump basically a Xerox that he wanted Trump to post on Truth Social, saying that they shouldn't have regulation around this type of industry. Trump did it, and then the next week, the regulations were dropped, and this company, money well spent for this company. I mean, it's just a price of doing business, but this is where we're living right now. I mean, this is a level of corruption that is really very Russia-esque, that is very Banana Republic-esque. And I think where Trump may and the Trump kids, Eric and, as I call them, Uday and Hussein, but Donald Trump Jr. and Eric have said this before, which is that they claim they didn't invest. They kind of put their business on hold during the first
Sure.
administration. They claimed they got blowback for it anyway, so what the hell, if we're gonna get blowback for it, we might as well go for it now. Um, you know, it's really just striking, and you're absolutely right because Navalny, people forget, but before Navalny became this martyr, how he started out was he was helping to organize these anti-corruption protests, and not just him. I mean, a tremendous number of really, um, Gary Kasparov. I mean, there are people who are real celebrities who decided that they were not going to stand for that in a country that has really never had a capitalist system and b a democratic regime. And they were out there protesting this. We have had both, and we're watching both slip away, and yet where are our where's our Navalny? Where are our leaders? Where are our Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate? Um, why
Yeah,
aren't
you
they
have a
speaking up?
handful of voices who are making, no waves, but it's not enough because it gets drowned out with all of this. The only thing I will say, you made a good point. Trump is doing this very overtly, whereas any other regime, whether it was the Assad regime or the Saddam Hussein regime or whatever regime, they usually do these things covertly because they create such horrific conditions for the general public that they don't want to give them any reason to incite a revolution. So in Russia, I mean, you don't see this kind of corruption inside of Russia. Putin is not bragging that he's having dinners where people are funneling money to him basically um to make policy. So the one good thing is that at least Trump is doing all of this overtly, and as conditions for the 90+% of us continue to deteriorate, prices continue to go up, and the market continues to unravel, which the stock market, really is being manipulated. I actually studied market and international finance back in the day. This is not normal behavior of what's happening with the
Well,
stock market. But I will say, if you look at all the underlying conditions for the economy, whether it's home sales, various reports that are coming out, this you see weakening and see us on course for recession. So, you
so
know,
I'm going to say two things about the market as somebody who has somewhat of an economic background. One is the market is not always a predictor of recession. It sometimes gets it right, sometimes gets it wrong. That's A. B, the market is overheated now because of AI. So you've got two things going on concurrently. You've got AI going gangbusters. It's a bubble that will eventually burst, eventually. And that's what's propping up the market right now. The fundamentals, the underlying fundamentals, the things that lead to recession, the things that lead to stagflation, which is where we might be, that is not good. And
yeah,
you have inflation, you have a weakening job market. The only reason we still have growth today, despite the tariffs, is because of AI. Again, one has nothing to do with the other. And eventually, AI, of course, will lead to a decrease in the job market because that's the purpose of AI is to replace human beings. Um, so you're really dealing with a situation here that is very precarious for those of us who are not tech investors in AI and who are not necessarily going to profit off of AI. And that's something that I think people need to be aware of at a time when you have not just Trump, but a tremendous number of Trump aligned tech interests, whether in the crypto space, in the AI space, more broadly in the tech space, doing very, very, very well. And what they have learned from Elon Musk, who was their useful idiot, to borrow a phrase from the Russians, is that they put Elon Musk out there to do their bidding and to reap all the downsides of doing their bidding, which is that he became the poster child and now Tesla stock is in the toilet and he's lost a tremendous amount of money. He's not poor by any stretch of the imagination, but nevertheless, he's worth a lot less than he was before. The rest of them, the Peter Thiels, the Curtis Yarvins, even the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Tim Cooks, all of those guys are doing just fine behind the
Yeah,
scenes.
but
And
that's a
yeah,
handful. That's a
that's a
handful
handful.
compared to everyone else whose prices from a year ago went up. Uh, where you see, it's much harder. I looked at the long-term unemployment report of people who have been unemployed 28 weeks, and this has gone up. So, I mean, you see a cooling job market and whatnot. So these conditions will catch up. And with the market, I'm sorry, I remember the days where some major event would actually move the market. And I look at the CNBC headlines. Oh, Trump orders 2 nuclear submarines to go to Russia, and you see the market, skyrocketing. I'm like, something like that
Well,
used
because
to
nobody
be.
believes, because he tacos out. So
Yeah.
and that's a very good example that leads us actually to what we're here to talk about today, which of course he did taco out, right?
Sorry for the
Yeah.
detour.
No, no, no. I mean, it's actually a good intro because he did taco out. Let's be very clear. He sent these nuclear submarines to Russia because Medvedev was saber rattling, and I guess Trump will take it from Putin, but he's not going to take it from Medvedev, which is fine. He sends Putin's buddy Steve Witkoff to Moscow after saber rattling, after saying that he's going to impose really harsh sanctions and Russia is going to be screwed if in 50 days they don't end this war. Wickoff goes to
Then it
Moscow.
went to 14 days, then it
Yeah.
went to 10 days, then by tomorrow, I
Well,
promise I don't see
yeah,
anything
of course. I
earth
don't know when this.
earth
Yeah.
shattering happening.
Well, of course not, because then he sends Wickoff to Moscow. Um, we, you know, we we have yet to find out what Wickoff's interests are here, because of course, let's not forget that Wickoff is a private citizen. He does not work for the United States government. He's got investment. His son, as I said, runs this World Financial Lenders, um, and which is a crypto fund. He's invested in that too. Very curious to see how much the Russians are pumping into that. We don't know because he's a private citizen, and that will be the last thing that's
Which,
naturalized.
by the way, is why he's being used. So there are no government records of
Right.
any of his visits.
Right. And he met with Putin, and hopefully he did not bring his phone again this time. And he then came back, and all of a sudden, Trump announced that he's going to reward Vladimir Putin by having a meeting with him, and ostensibly in the UAE in the next week or so, to talk about ending this war. And Olga, you know, it's kind of interesting to me how many times we've been here before.
Groundhog Day.
Hmm.
That's except the only place it's not Groundhog Day is for Ukrainians who are dying every single day from drone and missile attacks. But yes, I think, have had since we started this. Uh, we have had this conversation, I believe, like every 2 weeks, where it's being pushed down another week or two. And that's basically what Trump is doing. He continues to buy Putin time. Um, Russia has made it very clear they cannot end the war. They have no intention of ending the war. We've gone through this, I think, every 2 weeks. We discuss why Russia can't end the war and why they will not end the war. And here you have Trump again, the few days before, these sanctions and tariffs and whatnot are supposed to go into place, again kicking the can down the road and giving Putin another 2 weeks. So, I mean, we are now in August. I mean, this is the longest 2 weeks, although feels like 20 years since Trump came into office. But this is, I mean, he told us he was going to end this during transition. Then on day one, we are now 7 months in. The only thing that has happened is that Russia feels so emboldened that they have increased their attacks on Ukraine. And Ukraine has seen some of the worst attacks since the full scale invasion. And these attacks are hitting people sleeping, apartment buildings, hospitals. a maternity ward, killing a pregnant woman. I mean, this is directly hitting citizens, not military targets, not like Ukraine when they go into Russia, oil refineries, how you call it, Air Force bases. No, this is hitting regular, everyday people. I've lost count of how many children have been killed in the past few weeks. And this is the direct result of Trump because he keeps pushing the can down the road, providing cover for Putin, legitimizing Russia's actions. And as a result, I mean, every single person who has died in these and who has been buried under rubble as rescuers try to, uh, save them. This is on Trump. This did not happen. They're the reason that the past 3.5 years since full-scale invasion, we didn't see scenes like this on a daily basis. And now it's happening on a daily basis. And at the same time, Trump is weakening NATO.
He's weakening NATO. He's cutting, for all intents and purposes, any American soft power is gone in the region. So, for example, I have a very soft spot for Voice of America
Me
because
too.
that's what my family listened to when we were living in the Soviet Union and kind of huddled around a little transistor radio. My parents, I remember very well, trying to get the antenna just right at night so
My
they could
mom too.
so they could pick up that signal. Gone. I mean,
My
gone.
mom too.
And
She
and
told
and
me, used to tell
yeah,
me stories. I
yeah.
used to just try to hear what's happening out in the outside world and
Yeah, and
like,
and and again, we know from personal experience, personal family experience, because I remembered as a child, you because you spoke to your mother about this, but you don't underestimate that kind of thing um, as being critically important to people in Russia who want the truth. And they're not getting it. They're certainly not getting it from their government. They would have expected in previous decades to be getting it from our government, no more. But what's interesting about this is they're not just probing Ukraine, as anybody could have predicted who's not Donald Trump. They're now kind of softly and not so softly probing NATO, or at least the NATO
yeah,
countries
absolutely.
surrounding Russia. So, Lithuania is asking for help, a NATO country, um, to boost its air defenses after a second drone crossed its border. Those drones are not crossing the border by accident.
No,
Lithuania, if you can picture the map of the Baltics and in Eastern Europe, is right there. It is right by Poland, which is the big prize for the Russians. In fact, parts of Lithuania used to be, back in the Russian Empire days, parts of it were Polish, parts of it were Russian Empire. So it's something that very much Putin feels. Lithuania, of all the Baltics, I think he feels is most Russian in his perspective because it used to be so much of it used to be during the Empire days. Um, so, Lithuania is asking NATO to deploy additional air defenses. You've got Estonia, right, right there next to Lithuania and the Baltics, um, asking for help and essentially raising the alarm because Russia has deployed additional electronic warfare systems near their border. Why would Russia be deploying this near Estonia's border? It's a NATO country. And again, I think the failure for a lot of Americans on this issue is that they don't know basic geography and they don't understand where these countries are located and what they're next to. So the Baltics are on the Baltic Sea, some of but the Baltics are um uh sort of Scandinavian, sort of, Lithuania is certainly sort of Polish in terms of its proximity. And all that means is that when you have Sweden and Finland joining NATO, when you've got Poland, which is a key component of NATO, really the bulwark from Soviet aggression and Russian aggression now, um, for Western Europe, this is a slippery slope.
mhm,
And it's not just about Ukraine. If it were just about Ukraine, I think we'd all agree it would still be awful and a genocide and should end. But it's not just about Ukraine.
No, nope,
Um,
it
and
never
that's
has been.
it never has been. Ukraine was just the first domino to fall. Well, actually, I would argue Georgia was the first domino to fall, but Ukraine is the big domino to fall in the last decade for them, is the way they see it. And then, of course, there's Moldova, little Moldova, which the Russians have been meddling in for ages. They have
Hmm.
elections coming up next month on the 27th of September. And I mean, you tell me, but they're essentially, executing a hybrid warfare situation there to throw the elections and to really interfere in Moldovan elections. They need to interfere in Moldovan elections. They need Moldova back.
So before I get to Lithuania and Moldova and Baltics, just to give everyone a perspective, back to Ukraine, and then I'll move quickly.
Yeah.
In the month of July, I mean, just imagine if this was New York City or Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles or any other part of the United States. In the month of July, Russia launched 6,129 drones. Um, a daily average 728 drones, just to show you how egregious they have gotten. We never had 720 something drones per day or 6,000 plus drones. That's not talking about the ballistic missiles and all the other missiles that Russia is shooting into Ukraine. So just to get that. Lithuania, Russia has been probing NATO air defense and response times for quite a while. Lithuania is extremely important for the fact that NATO has the blind spot in the Suwalki corridor. And this is something that NATO actually itself has been worried about for the past decade. And this is something that Russia has its eyes set on. We also have to remember Lithuania is where Russia, prior to the full scale invasion, in order to threaten Europe not to get involved and have a response, they use Belarus, which is on Lithuania's border, to move migrants from the Middle East. With this scheme that Russian investigative reporters found the scheme and the people involved, where they were promising migrants in the Middle East um, passage into Germany and selling them actually packages. And then they would fly them to Minsk. From Minsk, drive them to the border, and they created a humanitarian disaster, trying to push migrants through Lithuania, through Poland on their borders. Right, and this was to August, September of 2021. So Lithuania is extremely critical, and just in general, Russia has been, increasing the testing of the border, of the response time, and everything. And at the same time, you have the Baltics, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, who did sign a pact a few years ago, and they started fortifying the border, building trenches, and doing everything to try, to as much as they can secure a potential Russian invasion, because this is where it's going. I'll never forget, this is even prior to this full scale invasion, how Russia, for entertainment, for sport, on Russian state TV, occasionally had a general with a map of the Baltics showing how quickly, in 48 hours, according to them, how quickly they can sweep through the Baltics and take it over. And this is for sport. I mean, no other country has these type of like nightly talk shows where you're like, oh, okay, which, country are we going to invade? Oh, look at this country. Yeah, we could take it in 48 hours. We would do this and this and that. So this is something that they've wanted to do. Um, we saw with Estonia, they did in 2007. Estonia was probably one of the first countries hit with this whole hybrid warfare spectrum, where they instigated the Russian speaking minority in Estonia after a statue was moved, uh, basically spread disinformation, fake news, propaganda, and did everything to cause violent protests. And then at the same time, Estonia, I believe, was the first country that was ever hit by another nation state with a cyber attack. And this was 2007, and Estonia's governments and financial banks systems, all their websites went down for weeks. And this was the first time, of course, the West didn't respond to it. And here we are where Russia is sitting in our, um, I hate call it critical infrastructure and has, access to backdoors. So this is with Estonia. Then with jamming, the jamming they have been doing. I have been screaming about this for a few years. I've written articles for SIPA and privately on my Substack because this is so dangerous. We really are lucky that Russia has not taken out a private airplane. I mean, they're known for taking out private airplanes. We see what's happening with, what is it, Azerbaijan? I believe that the airplane was shot down, that Russia's military. But we're lucky a civilian plane has not been taken down. They have been carrying out such an egregious jamming in the Baltic region, and also they moved it to Finland, Norway, that we're in shock. And now they're even moving more. So you could just imagine what's going to happen now when they have moved more of these systems towards NATO borders. And I believe they're like 12 miles away from NATO borders. I mean, this is closer than Manhattan is to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just want to give a little historic context here as to why the Baltics and also geographically why Lithuania is interesting. One is that, if you recall, Putin said that the biggest tragedy, the biggest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union, not the Holocaust, not World War II, the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The first country, the first republic, Soviet republic, to secede from the Soviet Union. And actually, I was in Moscow randomly on a school field trip when this happened, and I remember it very well. It was in March of 1990, and it was Lithuania. And that really began the domino effect. And after Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia very quickly seceded, and they actually didn't say it was a secession. They said they were declaring their independence because they said that their annexation in 1940, which is when the Russians went in and annexed the Baltics, was illegal. They were right. The Lithuanians, the Estonians, and especially the Latvians always hated the Soviet Union, always hated the Russians, as does anybody who's their neighbor, for obvious reasons. So, for a man who thinks the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Lithuania and the rest of the Baltics really hold a special little place in his heart because they're the ones that kicked it off. They're the ones, these little Baltics that nobody really thought were particularly, meaningful. They certainly weren't part of the whole Slavic triumvirate of Ukraine and Belarus and Russia, suddenly became the impetus for others, including then other republics, to declare their independence. So that's one. Two is Lithuania does not border Russia proper, but there is a Russian exclave called Kaliningrad, which used to be the East Prussian city of Königsberg, German. And after World War II, the Russians took it. It was part of the Treaty of Potsdam that they were able to take Königsberg and turn it into a Russian exclave really, called Kaliningrad. It is not connected to the rest of Russia at all. It is just this little tiny thing that borders Lithuania.
Where they have jamming equipment also.
Right. And that's important. It borders Poland and it borders Lithuania. It is a really critical little piece of land that is now almost entirely populated by Russians. The Germans basically all were expelled or fled right after World War II, although it used to be German. It's really crucial, and not enough people pay attention to Kaliningrad. But it's a really important place because it gives Russia that little extra border with Lithuania and with Poland, but not in a way that's really that apparent to people, as you would know looking at a map. In fact, if you looked at a map, you wouldn't even think that Lithuania bordered Russia. You'd say, what's the big deal? They don't border Russia. They border Belarus, which is basically a Russian satellite, but they don't border Russia proper. So all of these things are important because, we here in the United States and maybe in Western Europe, you tell me people living in Western Europe and Australia, wherever you're joining us from today, you might have a better sense of this geography because you're closer to it. But we here in the States don't really understand what this is about. These are kind of all outlying, faraway places on the periphery of Europe, and nobody ever thinks about little Lithuania. Nobody really thinks about little Kaliningrad for sure. But you should think about that because they are really critical places, and you should look at a map. And you should really look at a map because it is really telling when you look at a map as to what the Russians are doing, why they're doing it, and what, again, much like Trump, kind of signals what he's going to do. Nothing's secret about what Putin does either.
No,
You just have to know the history. You have to know the mindset. You have to know the geography to understand why there. Somebody in the chat asked, isn't Georgia next? No,
no,
I don't think so. Olga,
no.
you don't think so either? For the reasons we just outlined. Because
Georgia right now is under occupation of the Dream Party, which is effectively making Georgia a satellite of
yeah,
Russia. Russia cannot afford to physically occupy every country to reinstate the Soviet Union. So they basically, especially now with the economy, so they're fine with having puppet governments there to carry out their bidding. And then they, in return, provide security services when there are protests in these countries, like in Belarus or Georgia, to assist in quashing the protest. But they don't need to actually have a full, like, rewrite the map to have it right now at this point, as long as they have the Dream Party, which is a nightmare, there. Because the Dream Party and Ivashvili is doing everything that Russia wants. Like, there is no, what is it? Daylight is the thing. No daylight
yeah,
between the
yeah.
Kremlin and Ivashvili. So
And again, consult your maps and understand that Georgia is strategically for what Putin is trying to do, which is effectively to stop NATO, is not as critical as the Baltics. Certainly is not as critical as Poland, which would be a much tougher task even than Ukraine for him to take over. But nevertheless, you know,
he's threatening.
he's threatened. Ukraine is important because Ukraine borders those countries. I mean, Ukraine borders Poland. You would be hard up against Poland if you took over um, Ukraine. You would be hard up against. You'd be separated, obviously, by the sea, but you'd be hard up against Finland and Sweden um, and Poland if you took over the Baltics, and that's really critical. I mean, think about what you can do there facing west. Peter the Great had this whole thing about St. Petersburg. I don't know if people realize this, and I'm really going down rabbit holes here, but I think it's important for people to know. St. Petersburg was taken from the Swedes during Peter the Great's war with Sweden. It was a big war, and he took it. He won it, and I don't know, thousands, if not tens of thousands of people died, effectively transforming this northern swamp into this gorgeous, incredible, beautiful city. If anybody's ever had the opportunity to go to St. Petersburg, you will know it is one of the most beautiful places on earth. It is truly a combination of that.
Just don't go now. You'll
Don't
be
go
taking
now, but it is, but
hostage.
but 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 take my word for it. It is truly a combination of Paris and Venice. It is unlike any other place you'll ever see. And one day, I hope we could all go there. But I say that because Peter the Great built St. Petersburg as a window to the West, is what he called it. This is going to be Russia's window to the West, and he used Italian architects to build it. And it's unlike Moscow, which was not and is not, maybe it is now. I haven't been there in a long time, but was not a European city, a very Slavic city. St. Petersburg is very much a European city architecturally, and everybody always assumed that it was a window to the West because it was going to emulate Western architecture and Western art. That's not it. It was a window to the West insofar as it was in the northwest of the country and had tremendous proximity to Sweden, which owned Finland at the time. So consider that kind of Sweden/Finland. It was another opportunity to put a border hard up against Russia's perceived historic enemies. That's the window to the West. And in the same way, Ukraine is a window to the West, and not in the poetic way that Pushkin wrote about with St. Petersburg, but in a way of annexing just bits and bits and bits of the West more and more and more. Because if you have Ukraine, Poland is next. If you have the Baltics, all of a sudden Finland and Sweden are not they're not resting easy anyway, but all of a sudden they're not resting, particularly any easier.
Yep.
Uh and so on. It's a domino effect. Now you're talking about Georgia, for whoever asked about Georgia. That's the Caucasus. Does he need a window to Central Asia? Not particularly. He's already got Iran kind of in his pocket, or maybe he's in Iran's pocket. I don't know who's in whose pocket. Different priorities. That's why I keep saying, take a look at the map and take a look at what's interesting to him, and understand the Russian mindset and understand Russian history, because you really need to understand where his priorities are.
Now, two things. One, to finish off with Lithuania, Kaliningrad also just wanted to make a comment that I would say over the past decade, Russia really turned it into a military base. I remember tracking Iskander missiles being moved, and they really turned it into a military base. And this is like way before the full-scale invasion. It was after the invasion of Ukraine, but not the full-scale invasion. The second thing, does Putin have resources to open another front? Well, this is why Ukraine standing is so key, and what a lot of people and a lot of analysts fail to realize that, and we've seen it happen in occupied territories. And I suggest everyone, I'm actually going to include this, and with stolen Ukrainian children. Russia has started forcing them to go to the front lines and kill Ukrainians. So they are forcing stolen children who turn 17, sending them to the front lines to kill their fellow Ukrainians. And there's a big investigation that was just done. I'm going to include it in our show notes. In occupied territories, we have seen Russia forcing Ukrainians to go to the front line and kill Ukrainians in on non-occupied side. So we have seen these tactics. Again, Russia doesn't do anything out of thin air. They, you know, prepare for this. They tested, perfect any of these tactics. So should Ukraine or more of Ukraine fall, Russia suddenly is going to build up their military manpower by potentially millions. And now, instead of having the shitty army they have, they can actually go and force Ukrainians to kill Estonians, the French, the Germans, the Polish, because you have to do it. You're under gunpoint. Again, this is war crimes. Everyone is documenting what is happening in these cases, but there are so many of these cases, and your choice is you either go to the front line with a gun at your head, or if you refuse, you will be shot on the spot and your family executed. So there is no in betweens, there's no anything. So the more parts of Ukraine that would fall if the West doesn't get their act together and help Ukraine push back, the more you have Russia building up their own military power. And basically, people will have to be forced. And this is something I've been warning. I've spoken to European officials about this years ago. And I said, do you understand how critical, besides everything else, it is for Ukraine to survive? Because Russia can go from whatever shitty, alcohol freaking military they have now, and suddenly have a military that is way more powerful than all the militaries combined in Europe. And that's it. And obviously, there would be sabotage operations, because there have been cases where Ukrainians, they know they're going to die, or if they lose their mind and they just end up killing as many Russians around them before taking their life, or they'll, hateful, get killed. But I mean, this is the danger that we're dealing with just on this front. And plus, Ukraine is one of the IT capitals of the world. God forbid they see the talent there. I mean, they're one of the emerging innovators when it comes to tech. And God forbid, I mean, even with drones, we see the United States is sitting there now. This is the United States of America and the Pentagon sitting and saying, how can we catch up to Ukraine's drone program? Because of how quickly they developed this drone program and how quickly they're testing new technology, not in a laboratory, but actually on the field, which is way more powerful than testing in a laboratory.
So let's be clear that that's who Donald Trump is rewarding with the summit next week in the UAE or wherever they're meeting. Uh, Nothing is going to come of it. Putin is going to flatter Trump or blackmail Trump or somehow influence Trump into giving him more time. Um, there is no consistent policy when it comes to this war from the
Yeah.
White House. If you remember, it wasn't so many months ago that they decided to humiliate Volodymyr Zelensky in the White House. Now, Zelensky was kind of in good odor the last month or two. Now it seems like Putin's back. So, you know, all of this is fascinating. And I will also add with this Indian tariff problem. The Indians have always kind of vacillated between going towards Moscow or going towards Washington. They were always the leader of the unaligned states, but in recent years they've been closer to Moscow. The Chinese and the Indians they fought a war. India and China, they're not the best of friends, but nevertheless, you know, tough times call for interesting allies. By doing this, and if we continue to impose sanctions on China the way that we are, the Indians might find kinship with the Chinese, and they certainly might find kinship with the
They're
Russians.
actually going for meetings to China, and Modi's going for a meeting to Russia. So
So,
kinships might happen much quicker.
yeah. So what's happening here is I don't know what the problem is with Modi, between Modi and Trump. Obviously, it's nothing to do with Russia for
I think
sure.
Elon Musk.
Maybe.
I
Yeah. It may be Musk related. Whatever it has nothing to do with this war in Russia. But what this is doing is driving India more into the arms of the Kremlin. I mean, we should be doing everything possible to bring India, which is a massive emerging market. I mean, it's not even emerging anymore. It's a massive market, most populous country in the world. What are we with yes, they have their massive problems, but are really, speaking of a high-tech workforce, speaking of a deeply educated workforce that speaks English, I might add. Um, not all of them. There's incredible poverty there, but there's also incredible education opportunities there. This is a country we should be embracing. This is a country that we should not be driving into the arms of the Russians and the Chinese, and that is exactly what we're doing. If I were to create a monster that I wanted to destroy the United States from within and without, I would be doing everything Trump is doing right now.
Yep,
Everything.
100%.
Um, Olga, before we go, as
I
I
just
mentioned,
wanted to touch
yeah,
on Moldova last
yep,
for a minute.
okay, yep, of course,
Um, so Moldova, since Russia is, involved in this genocidal war against Ukraine, Ukraine can no longer be a testing ground for the past several years. Um, Ukraine has always been the testing ground for everything we have seen come here, to the United States, across all of Europe, and frankly, across the globe. Russia used Ukraine with disinformation operations and with political capture. And I mean, you name all the tactics, it was tested
yep.
and perfected in Ukraine. Election attacks, cyber attacks, taking out the power, the electric grid. I mean, everything, poisoning the water supply, everything you could think of was tested in Ukraine. They no longer, right now, obviously, could be a test case, So Russia shifted post full scale invasion to Moldova. They are this interference is the latest in election interference, because we just had elections last year in November where they literally had a assassination plot against Sandu that was discovered. They also were recruiting locals to send them. I forgot to which country to train them. Wagner was doing it to send them back into Moldova to incite violent attacks. So, my point is with Moldova, the West really, like the rest of the West, should pay very close attention because Moldova, for the past 2.5 years, or I would say 3 years, had been the primary testing ground on election interference. They're testing out different ways to subvert voters, disinformation, everything. They're using AI and perfecting this tactic because Russia latched onto AI immediately. So I just wanted to say that everyone really should focus on Moldova because whatever is happening there, you can bet is going to be used in the United States in elections, in Germany, in France, and frankly, every other country, in which Russia is at a point, I think they interfered in 60 plus elections. And they're going to use the tactics that they perfect in Moldova. So I just wanted to finish with Moldova.
Well, speaking of election interference, as I mentioned earlier, but for people who didn't join in the very beginning of our chat today, Olga and I, as many of you probably know, launched a new series a couple weeks ago that talks about Russian interference in the 2016 election. We did this because Trump and Tulsi Gabbard are now trying to pretend that the Russians did not interfere. They did. And as I said before, the only hoax of the Russia hoax is that it was a hoax. It is not a hoax. It happened, as Olga and I are painstakingly documenting. But what I think is interesting is that since we did our live on Tuesday, 2 days ago, about second part of our series, which only covered 2008 through 2012. Next week, we're going to be talking about how they infiltrated the NRA, which I strongly recommend people tune in for. But, you know, they are basically saying that their smoking gun are these Hillary Clinton email plans, that Hillary Clinton had these plans or that she orchestrated the Russia probe to smear Trump. That there's some secret emails that they discovered. And that is what the CIA is now coming up with. And that is their rationale for the big smoking gun. And that's why the whole thing was a hoax perpetuated by Hillary Clinton. And the New York Post is running with this. Trump is running with this. And the Trump administration is running with this. And John Ratcliffe is running with this. Yada, yada. Well, they based that finding, Olga, which you could talk about more, on these emails that were in the appendix of the report that came out on Russian interference. However, John Durham, who was the special counsel who was hired by Trump brought on the first time around, to prove that the whole thing was a hoax. Not only did not prove that the whole thing was a hoax, and actually doubled down and said, yeah, they did interfere, but he concluded, despite really not wanting to, that that was a Russian fake plant. These emails did not exist, except that Russia created them to make it look like Hillary Clinton tried to frame Trump for the Russia hoax. So, what do you think about this? This is just...
This is typical Russian operations. They hack emails, and we've seen this so many times. They hack emails, or they release parts of a video, or they'll intercept a phone call, and then they will fabricate parts of this and release real parts with fabricated parts to try to give it some kind of legitimacy. And this is a typical Russian operation. And I mean, I hate literally anyone who looks at my Twitter back then, which I actually came onto Twitter because of Russia's attack to warn people. Um, I said that, once the emails were hacked, that they were going to fabricate and insert fabrications. Parts of the email will be fabricated, sometimes a whole email. And just to give one example of how ridiculous Russia is and how, I mean, this is one of the oldest operations. It improves with technology. But I remember in 2015, Kommersant had, which is Russia's state media, had this breaking news that the Russian government had obtained a tape of two people speaking about shooting down MH17. And this was the smoking gun proof that the CIA shot down MH17. And I believe the other guy who was supposed to be this was MI6. I can't remember 100%. But they released this audio of a conversation where two people who, part of this big CIA plot said, oh, the Ukrainians are too stupid to do this, and we need to go and shoot down an airliner. And basically admitted to that. And this was Russia's smoking gun that the CIA shot down MH17. Who shot it down? Russia. Who did the international courts identify and reveal every single detail after a freaking decade-long investigation? Russia. And I'll give you another small example. Russia, in 2017, I believe, this was fascinating. I couldn't stop laughing. In 2017, they had breaking news that the U.S. is assisting ISIS and providing cover for them to move through Syria. They released satellite images. Here you go. This is the Russian Defense Department releasing satellite images. Look, U.S. is providing cover. Here's ISIS, and they're more moving through. It was a fucking Call of Duty video game clip that they released, that they eventually took back after they put it out as their proof, and everyone savvy quickly looked and located that this was a Call of Duty video clip. This was their evidence. So my point is, Russia carries out these operations, and you have now Fox News taking fabricated Russian emails that even Durham himself said this is by Russian intelligence services and running with it as if this is the smoking gun that the Obama administration and Hillary and everyone conspired to say that Russia is attacking our election in order to delegitimize Trump. When everyone else, including Marco Rubio, who has 17 hats now because apparently Trump can't find people to carry out his things and awards his loyalists with every agency position. You have Rubio, who was one of the head people on the Senate Intel report,
Yeah.
saying that yes, and I mean, this Senate, if whoever read the Mueller report, the Senate Intel report was, I can't even begin to tell you how much more in depth and straightforward, to the point that they called Manafort a Russian agent, which the Mueller report did not.
And,
So
and and that report, the acting chairman of the Intelligence Committee at the time was Marco Rubio. So a very bipartisan report issued by a
exactly.
Republican Senate.
Yeah, now Marco Rubio doesn't remember any of this. This new Marco Rubio in power um, doesn't see it. But the point is that, there have been countless investigations. And now what is worrying, if this was just propaganda and disinformation like Trump did during Trump 1.0, it would be fine. But they are actually doing this to lead down to prosecutions of Obama officials. And I can tell you, just like with the Epstein stuff, where the base has been primed and indoctrinated, that this whole Democratic pedophile ring is going to be taken down. And here we are with Trump's name is so far as the only one that the FBI was ordered to erase from God knows how many documents. With all of this, they have the same way been indoctrinated that Democrats created this Russia hoax that they have committed treason against this country and that they should be arrested. And these are the same comments that they're making today that they made in 17 and 18 and 19 and 20. So if people think that Trump is not going to use the Department of Justice to indict people for something that we see that Durham himself said was fabricated by Russian intelligence, and that's why he couldn't take it seriously, then, this is where we are. So I think this is something that, and this is why you and I launched this project, because there is no way we're going to allow Republicans, one, to rewrite an attack on the United States of America by an adversary whose main goal is to see the collapse of the United States of America. They don't want to, like, Trump is their vehicle, but whatever way they can see, if they have to support, far left Democratic candidate against a far right candidate. Their main point is to implode this country. They don't have loyalty, not to one American, not to Trump, not to anyone. So that's my
Yeah.
rant. I'm done
Susan, we
with
will have,
sun
yeah,
beaming on me.
Susan, we will have an episode on the Mueller report eventually. We're working up to it. We're right now, as you can imagine, chronologically building up to what happened in 2016, which is why we're focusing this past week on the first Obama administration and then now moving into their influence operation with the NRA, and then we'll get there. But the Mueller
Yeah.
report is way down the line. You have to understand how we got to where we got in the first place.
Yeah.
All right. We have been at this for an hour. We are so grateful to all of you here in the United States and around the world for joining us today. Thank you so much for everybody who joined us on Tuesday. We will be back again this coming Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern for another episode of our Russian interference podcast, which will be based on our drop of a newsletter on Monday night talking about how the Russians infiltrated the NRA. And then we'll be back here talking current events next Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern, as we always do for Pax Americana. In the meantime, thank you to everybody. Stay safe, stay positive as much as you can in this crazy world. And by the time we get to next Thursday, I'm sure there'll probably be another 27 different policy changes with respect to Vladimir Putin.
Oh,
And
God.
who knows? Right. By next week, they could be meeting in the UAE and we could be.
They might be meeting in the White House. Why not?
Yeah.
I mean,
Possible.
Trump might invite the war criminal math murderer and roll out a red carpet for him. We don't know.
We don't know.
And sorry, I have a skylight, and at this time, the sun decided to really beam down at me. I look like I'm going upwards.
No, you look good. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. See you next week. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.